And so let's talk a bit about the data that we're obtaining. And also we're going to go ahead and speculate a little bit on what we have seen so far in terms of aspects and practices and tips and tricks associated with best practices for PRRS management for a quicker and a smoother recovery after the PRRS outbreak. And so we're going to tag team here, Rodrigo, Giovanni, and I, to tell the story. And then at the end of the about 35 minutes or so, we're going to open up for discussions. We are curious to see, pick your brain on this topic of PRRS outbreak, recovery, and response and recovery. All right. So just a bit about our team here. We call ourselves the Field Epi team at Iowa State. And we are, long story short, we are a technical services team embedded in the university setting. So our job, our mission statement is to develop and evaluate strategies to improve swine health and productivity. And in a long story short, that's what our group does. So working directly with practicing veterinarians, I should say the real vets, and the producers on field-based research, such as this one that we're going to talk about, to generate data to allow the field vets to make decisions to improve health and productivity. Landing here on the POMP program. Again, POMP standing for PRRS Virus Outbreak Management Program. And we do have a web page dedicated to this program. It's fieldepi.org/POMP. And what the program is about, roughly, the program has three components. The first component, or what we call the core program, it consists of a brief survey. Rodrigo is gonna talk a little bit about the survey in a bit, but the survey, we collect demographic characteristics and from the herd that went through a PRRS outbreak, and also collect the major practices. We think about the biomanagement and immunologic solutions applied in response to the PRRS outbreak. Then we follow these herds over time by collecting diagnostics to measure progress over time as far as how PRRS status evolves over time, from positive unstable to positive unstable at low prevalence to stability, and from selected herds all the way back to the naive status. That's the first component. So we're going to talk about practices associated with time to stability. The other component is the productivity component. A lot of those herds, if not all of them, also agreed to share with us some selected productivity parameters. Rodrigo is again going to talk a little bit more about that. But then what we do with that productivity records is we use some standardized statistical algorithms to detect and measure and compare time to baseline productivity, how long it took for the farm to recover productivity. And then once we know that, we go and calculate the total, what we call the total loss, which is, long story short, that sum of piglets that was not weaned during the course of the PRRS outbreak until the herd recovered. And the last mile here, and perhaps one of the most exciting ones because we are learning a ton, and Giovanni is going to share a bit more about that in a bit, is the whole genome, the whole PRRS genome sequencing data. And what we're doing with this is we are building this library of PRRS outbreak data, recovery, right time to stability, baseline production, so on and so forth, with the whole genome data. And that allows us to better understand the viral characteristics, look for hotspots in the genome, understand the impact of recombination and multiple viruses circulating in the herd. How does that affect whole herd metrics such as time to stability and again baseline productivity? So Giovanni is going to cover that, and we're excited with this addition to the program. So here are some results. We're going to jump quickly here in some results. We can talk a bit about the details on the methods if needed, but we're going to jump to the results here. And what we did here is, what you see here is a table of time to stability in weeks. So the numbers are how many weeks it took for the farms to reach, in our definition here, 8 consecutive negative PCR negative results. So in 8 consecutive weeks, consistently producing negative results on a mostly processing fluid collected on a weekly basis from most piglets being processed that week. And you see here in blue the cohort 2021, which is consists of herds that broke between 2019, 20, 21, right, Giovanni? Yep. And so the median time has been 35 weeks, but you can appreciate the range, right? Looking at the 10th percentile up all the way to 90, appreciate the difference going from 23 weeks to over 60, so over a year, right? 66 weeks or so, median time between being 35 weeks. And if you think about what does that mean? Is that a long time? Is that a quick time? Well, you know better than I do based on your expectations, but based on ours here, if we compare to a similar cohort that we did 10 years ago in the original time to stability study that I had the chance to work with Bob Morrison, my previous mentor, and some others, at that time, the median time was 27 weeks, right? That study, the original time to stability study, 27 weeks. So if you look at compared to today, a bit longer, and then you can argue, hey, is that because of the virus that changed? Is it because now we have processing fluids? Back then, we were bleeding 30 piglets per month, and that was the AASV status at that time. So maybe it's a bit of both, more sensitive methods today, but there is enough evidence to support that the virus has evolved too. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But then the other metrics that we talked about is time to baseline productivity. So in brief, how long it took, what's the number of weeks that it took for the farm to recover the same productivity level that it had prior to the break, and using exactly the same algorithms. Those are all written in SAS using SPC method, more specifically the exponentially weighted moving average. That's all published, and if somebody wants the codes, we will be happy to share. It's longer too, demonstrating that this cohort that we've been following with contemporary herds, it's taking longer to recover productivity. And then the last metric that we follow is total loss per 1,000 sows, right? Which is, again, a measure of how many piglets was weaned below average, so below expectation from the herd between the outbreak until this time to baseline productivity. So it's a sum of total loss of attributed to PRRS or following the PRRS outbreak. And today, right, back then it was 2,700 pigs per 1,000 sows, and right now 4,000 pigs per 1,000 sows, and the whole distribution changed, right? If you look at the variability here between the 10th and then 90th percentile, going from a couple thousand pigs to over 7,000 pigs per 1,000 sows. And again, this is per 1,000 sows. So if you have a 5,000 sow herd, you just multiply this by 5. And so in summary, longer to achieve stability, longer to achieve baseline productivity, and more severe losses as measured as number of pigs weaned out the door per 1,000 sows. And now in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about what are the factors associated with that change. And then again, we want to hear your comments, your thoughts about all this. So take homes, we're going to save you from all the survival analysis and the busy plot. So we're going to jump here to the conclusions. But again, should you be interested in have a geek-to-geek conversation and get into the weeds, we'll be happy to arrange that conversation. So the factors associated with shorter time to stability and lower production impact. So better, quicker recovery. Or prior immunity, we saw it back then 10 years ago, and the cohorts that we work today, and the cohorts we work somewhere in between, it's pretty consistent, meaning that the herds that break when they are naive or close to naive, provisional negative or negative, they have a much longer time to recover, and they have a bigger dip in productivity compared to herds that break when they are stable or 2VX or somewhere in between with some herd immunity. Herd closure is a big factor. It's one of the most important factors in our database. We should have over 240 or so herd outbreaks in the database. And so comparing the herds that did herd closure compared to those that did not, the success rate to achieve stability increases substantially for herds doing herd closure by 40 or 50% percentage point. It's a big thing. One of the biggest predictors is herd closure. Reporting seeking elimination, and that's by the discretion of the herd veterinarian. In that survey that we talked about, there's a simple question: is the herd achieving elimination, complete virus elimination, or is the end goal to reach somewhere between low prevalence and stability and leave the herd there, not necessarily reaching seeking elimination? And not surprisingly, the herds that are targeting elimination, 80% of those reached stability, compared to only 40% of those that said, you know what, we're not going to elimination. We just want to manage, we just want to control, bring it to a low prevalence. The herds that reported seeking elimination, they had a more severe production loss. And if you think about it, why is that, right? And so in our minds, it's because the herds that are seeking elimination, those are confounded with the previous immunity status. If they're seeking elimination, it's because they were there before and they believe they keep in there. So their productivity bar is higher, right? They're reaching their full potential productivity-wise compared to those herds that are not seeking elimination, and perhaps because they're living in this endemic situation where their productivity is lower to start with, and maybe with a wider confidence interval, so a higher variability. So it's not very hard to reach back to productivity when your productivity is already a bit lower to start with and with a bigger variation. That's our take on this, looking at the data. Moving down the line here, deliberate whole herd exposure was also a big deal. There are some herds that report that they don't do any deliberate exposure. They were relying on natural transmission by, for example, moving infected gills around, or forcing strategies to promote natural exposure as opposed to deliberate exposure, right? For example, either doing a whole herd inoculation with a live resident virus or LVI, or using a modified live virus vaccine. So some exposure was certainly better than none as far as time to stability and the production losses. And as we have seen and reported 10 years ago, the herds that we see today are pretty consistent with the finding that the ones that start the exposure program using a modified live virus vaccine, with or without LVI, live virus exposure after that, they will have a shorter time to baseline production. They will have a lower production impact compared to the herds that do LVI. The herds that start the program with LVI, followed or not with MLV, they will reach stability sooner and quicker than herds that start with the program with LVI. So we've got to balance that, right? The herds with LVI reach stability shorter, but with a high price tag on that, which is the productivity impact. So it depends if you're a commercial herd, multiply herd, you may favor one versus the other here, productivity or time to stability. We had some herds doing batch farrowing. So, right, so instead of continuously breeding and weaning, cycling the herd in a 4 or 5 week system, right, Giovanni? And those herds were associated with better numbers to better, quicker recovery. Timing, another question in the survey was about time. When do you pull the trigger in terms of your biomanagement practices, right? Your MacRebel-like practices, stuff to make the things to make practices to make virus transmission between crates and between rooms tougher. And the herds that reported implementing those practices sooner, closer to the break, those had better outcomes. Around 10, 12 weeks or so, 8, 10, 12 weeks or so, compared to some that will only implement those MacRebel after they started winning negative, having some negative results. And Giovanni is going to talk more about this PRRS genotype. Yeah, that's a good transition here to talk about the virus itself, Giovanni.
Okay. Daniel, we have one question in the chat that might be good to answer now for the content. It's related. Then we can keep going if you want.
Thank you, Edison. So opening up the chat here. User 1174 said, you said negative herd take longer to recover and has higher loss. What's the definition of negative? Is it completely negative or yes? So that for our purposes here, we're using the time to stability, which is defined by the purpose of these studies here as 8 consecutive PCR negative result on a weekly sample of processing fluids. The other question was when comparing time to stability 2011 versus 2021, was there any difference between mean herd size? Would herd size play a role in extended TTS? Good question. We should explore that question deeper. From the analysis we have done so far between that herd, that population and this population, we did not find any association with herd size. But we didn't get deep into the layout of the herd, right? Number of barns, remodeled versus not. So that's something that we should dive into. Giovanni.
Yeah, there is more questions there. Yeah, 2 more questions.
User jury 1174. What about herd vaccinated multiple times with MLV commercial vaccine and very low ELISA response follow multiple vaccination? Do you consider it negative or positive? I believe the question is about the prior immune status, right? If so, we would not consider that negative or naive. We would consider that as having some herd immunity. We won't have data on ELISA titers, but we would have captured information such as MLV use before the break and outbreak before the current break. Dr. Mason asking, was there a time between MLV and LVI that showed better results? Time between MLV and LVI. The interval, I don't think we look at that.
No, we did not look at that. We look at the combination between approaches. And when you use it, well, consistent about using MLV or LVI, you had better results than when you used one and the other or did alternative approach there. So the production impact was lower when you were consistent in the approach that you used, even inside of the break that you were, or most impactful was if you were consistent in the approach that's guilt exposure before and after the outbreak. Right, so it seems that we addressed the questions in the chat. Feel free to keep sending those in. And one thing that we, as I say, we are really excited about this project is because we have been looking into translate those information of first sequence that we got, the A, T, Cs, and Gs, and those comes through even by the traditional method, the R5 that we have been using, and taking information based on that. But we went deeper into that and tried to really take information out of next generation sequencing approach, and the results that we got from that tool that is either dual genome sequencing or genome fragments that we call contigs, and make information for the farms that we are enrolled. So there was a subset of all the farms that are in POMP that was financed by the National Pork Board and the Pork Producers Association to look into the applicability of next generation sequencing results in terms of how these impact time to stability and time to baseline production and the recombination. So surprisingly, when we started to do a whole genome sequence in these farms, and at the time of the outbreak, and then follow these herds through the elimination process, doing whole genome sequencing processing with samples, we found that multiple PRRSV strain was a reality there, that 18 of 19 herds had at least 2 wild type strains that was circulated. So presence of 2 PRRSV strain was kind of our baseline, and everything else was compared as more than 2 for comparisons there. So one of the eye openings that we got was sometimes in naive herds, we found right after the break more than 1 PRRSV strain. So that means that we need to start thinking that when we break with a PRRS virus, it's not the side that we are dealing with 1 PRRS strain, but we may be dealing with more than 1 there that we entered in these herds. So that was a high level overview of number of strains that we did, and we are taking out all the approach and background how we got there. But if you want to get more details, we have paper published and everything that could share with you to take deeper into that. But what we found was that, well, if the herds that broke with PRRS virus and found more than 2 strains in the herds towards the process of elimination, they took more 12 weeks longer to achieve stability when compared with herds that had up to 2 PRRS strains. So the higher the virus diversity that you have there, the longer it took to reach stability. And they also saw some herds that had some decrease in CT values towards the process, or some changes in production parameters like number of aborts, improving mortality, increase there, that we could also associate when we found those PRRS strains. And coincidentally or not, these farms that had up to 2 PRRS strains, they had 1,800 fewer total loss when compared with farms that had more than 3 or more PRRS strains that circulated. Other piece of information that we can get only when we are looking for next generation sequences is the evidence of recombinating strains. And looking into that, we found out that there was this recombination event, they occur very frequently. And the herds that had recombinant strain detected at the time of outbreak, they had 1,800 more piglets lost compared with herds that had no recombination detected. So one very interesting finding and curiosity was that, well, 7 out of 12 herds that had recombination events detected, that account for 6% of those herds, the recombination was detected when the farm had more than 3 PRRS strain. So the higher the viral load that you have inside of your farm, then it seems like to contribute for development and appearance of recombinant strains in those herds. So this was the very high level overview of the finds when we are exploring and using PRRS virus next generation sequence for this. And one of the very interesting approach that we are believing more and more that we should be using is when a herd goes through an outbreak to do whole genome sequence to recover a farm reference strain, or at least store samples that you could go later on and do that approach if you are in a need to do further comparison towards the elimination process. One question that we have in the chart is that if MLV counts as a PRRS strain, and yes, if it was detected with the whole genome sequence, yes, it was accounted as a PRRS strain. Also, what was the variation in wild types was considered different? Well, good question for that one. So everything that was up to 1% difference in nucleotide difference between one strain to the other we considered as the same strain. Everything that was up to between 1 and 2% different, we kind of call the gray area there, and we continue to consider it as the same strain. But everything that was more than 2% difference, then we started to say that was a different strain that was detected.
So on another, going back to basics, right? One thing that we started learning when we put those production data together, that Rodrigo is going to talk a bit about that in a bit, as well as watching those herds as they progress towards stability over time, is that is the opportunity to have some specific milestones for the herds, right? We talked about several weeks to recover productivity. We talked about 30-some weeks to recover stability, but the herd, the vet and the herd, I don't think we should be waiting that long to realize that something's wrong, or to say, be confident and say, yeah, we are progressing confidently here toward that expected goal. So, for example, as the herd transition from 1A to 1B, from positive unstable to low prevalence, according to the current AASV guidelines, we understand that looking at the several herds that we see over time is that abortion levels is one of the first things that spike up, but it's also one of the first things that comes back to baseline. So if we are monitoring that consistently over time, should not be happy if it's after 6 weeks and the abort level is not yet in baseline. And the very next one to recover will be stillbirths and mummies, if you put those in the same bucket, just because of potential misclassification and so on and so forth. Should be 12 to 16 weeks. If it's past that time, you still not recovered, something else is going on. And then number of pigs that are weaned, that's the last, right? The throughput, that's what the sow farm is there for, but it's not going to be until 16 to 22 weeks in some herds to fully recovered, considering that you have a full break with a pretty aggressive strain. And so some offer some of those milestones for people to monitor closely, and again, further investigate, and don't be happy, don't settle for less, don't expect that the herd will recover. If it didn't reach those milestones, it's an opportunity to dig and investigate. We're going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by investigate in a bit. But then as the herds transition to low, when they get to the low prevalence scenario, productivity will pretty much have recovered already for the most part, at least in the breeding herd. You may still see some PRRS-related activities in the downstream flow, but in the breeding herd, the pigs will look great, the numbers will look fine, and you won't see any PRRS clinical signs there by the time you reach stable. And then if you look at the PCR results over time, right? Sometimes producers ask, I don't think I should be testing right after the break, right? Because I know I'm going to be positive. What am I going to do with the results? And then our answer is, you may consider doing diagnostics as soon as a few weeks after the break. And the reason is you want to see that CT values rising, right? You got to have a trend line over time. It's not going to be, it's never a clear line, but it's certainly, so there will be some ups and downs, but certainly you do expect to see that trend of CTs going up with some negative PCR results around 12 to 16 weeks. Most PCR results somewhere around the 30-week line, and consistent PCR negative results. We see that in a lot of herds between 30 and 42 weeks. And again, if you're not there yet, there's opportunity to further investigate. And here, for example, one slide with tongue tips, PCRs after the break, week after week. So in the Y, so in the X, sorry, in this vertical line here, the Y-axis, you see CT values from PCRs, and over time here in the X-axis, weeks post-break, you see that there are some ups and downs, but clearly you can draw a trend line here toward negativity, right? Some intermittent pattern of detection here, somewhere after week 20, but you can clearly see this trend, which makes you feel good, right? The herd is directed to where you want, which is stability. And again, regardless if you use serum or tongue tips, processing fluids, family oral fluids, that's what you should expect. And if not, go ahead and investigate. Some key factors associated with that, we talked a bit about that, so we're gonna keep it short. Herd immunity, pig flow, load close expose, it's certainly a big thing. Guild status at entry in the sow herd. You don't want naive guilds coming in herds that are at low prevalence. So you want to immunize them ahead of time and make sure that they are non-shedding at the time of entry if you are targeting to live in a low prevalence or stable scenario. Biomanagement and biocontainment, right? Big thing, especially in those projects where we do massive sampling. We have some vets that invest in that in their herds. To those projects, it's pretty clear that the virus is not randomly distributed in the herds. So it shouldn't be expected that you have some farrowing rooms with a very high prevalence. Most crates are positive, and within those crates, most pigs are positive. And in the very next room, just divided by a wall, you could have a completely negative room. And then the very next room, it's a low prevalence. So all the way in between positives and negatives. So at that time here, as the herd transitioned from low prevalence to stable, and then to 3 and 4, if that's the case, we got to hit hard on that biomanagement and biocontainment and implement the practices to make it hard for the virus to navigate through space and time, right? Or what we call the Star Trek effect, the space and time in this case here, the room after room, the crate after crate, week after week. And again, investigate, and what we mean by investigate, those delayed or unexpected recovery, whether there is a decrease in CT values or spike in aborts or kind of persistent mortality, either in the neonatal level or suckling pig level. Gotta revisit those biomanagement strategies to make sure that the virus is not having the opportunity to move back from old pigs to midway through to kind of newborns. So revise biomanagement, strategically placing PCR testing, tongue tips, for example. We've been talking about that for a while now. Collecting stillbirth tongue tips from stillborn piglets. Great work here from Isadora. Should have another presentation at the McKean conference demonstrating tongue tips from stillborn pigs as a way to assess viral circulation in the gestation herd. And then the processing fluid age, you hit that 3 to 7 days of age, and then the family oral fluid, you hit that weaning age. So what you want to do with this strategic sampling is, whenever processing fluid is positive, it's it's positive, move on. But if it's persistently positive, you want to go back to the tongue tips and ask the question: is this infection coming from the sow herd, or is it from circulating in the suckling pig population? And so if you have negative tongue tips from stillborn and positive processing fluids, you know what's going on. The virus is circulating in the suckling pig. If both are positive, you got to go back to the sow herd because there's still virus circulation there. And when both of these sample types are negative, then you wonder, how about my weaning age pigs? And that's when you place the family oral fluid or some sort of sampling at that weaning age time. But at that time, you gotta expect low to near zero prevalence, right? If the virus is still there. And so gotta either use 10, 12 ropes or really go and bleed over 100 pigs. And the other investigation tool is, Giovanni talked about that, is whole genome sequencing to whether there is a spike, again, the productivity, unexpected recovery in the productivity records or in the CTs. Whole genome sequencing has been extremely helpful. Several cases here that we're working with. to rule out things like, is it a new introduction? Is it a recombination that happened? Are there any unexpected viruses? For example, from a couple of years ago when I was stable, I thought that I eliminated, but guess what? Now you still find that virus circulating in the herd. So all that can happen, and all that has happened here frequently. And so gotta investigate that closely with whole genome sequencing. It has been a pretty good tool. Yeah. And as to finalize here, as herd transition to stability with or without vaccination, whether you're going to stay here or keep moving to the green categories here, 3 and 4, it's again the importance of the diagnostics, because at this point in time, productivity is going to be perfectly fine. Your aborts or mortalities, everything's going to look fine. Clinically, the pigs look great. You cannot tell the difference. Do not trust your eyes in this step here. Really need diagnostics. And think on that progression of CT values over time and your whole genome sequencing to further investigate the unexpected results. If you have unexpected results, don't say, hey, let's wait a couple more weeks and see. Go ahead and investigate, right? You may find some opportunities for improvement. All right, so we're still enrolling herds, right, Rodrigo? And Rodrigo is going to walk through here the eligibility criteria and next steps for you to enroll herds should you have the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe some of you are wondering, what should I do to enroll my herd? So if I had a PRRS outbreak, so what should I consider to enroll my herd in participating in this program, right? So first, since it's a PRRS outbreak management program, so all those breeding herds that are facing a PRRS outbreak, it's eligible to participate, right? So most of you usually have a control and elimination plan to do after outbreak, which is also important. So we're going to collect all those information, like Dr. Linhares said, through a survey. So it's pretty simple survey, I could say that, like it's just in a few minutes you can fill out all those information to share it with us. And like Dr. Linhares said, so with this survey, we basically would like to collect like demographics characteristics of those herds and also management practices that you want to use after the outbreak, right? So, and also diagnostic results. So Dr. Linhares talk a lot about this here, the importance of those diagnostics. So we're going to use those to track your after outbreak and also calculate in terms of weeks to achieve stability, right? And from the productivity parameters, we're going to use those to calculate the impact of the outbreak, comparing before the baseline of productivity before and comparing with after outbreak. So a little bit about the survey. We have an Excel-based survey from some of you that already used this in the past. Maybe it's a better option to use the Excel one, but we also have now a web-based survey. It's exactly the same survey, but with these two options for you. So whenever it's best for you to fit best for you, you can choose to use and to share with us all those demographic and management practices. In terms of productivity parameters, we have been collecting, as you can see here, data about the breeding herd inventory, total born alive, the number of pigs weaned. So these base productivity parameters that you have there in your daily basis. But if you also have another or different parameters that you want to share with us, and you're going to look for those metrics that Dr. Linhares mentioned, of course, we can back to you with those information related with those metrics, right? So don't feel, don't think that we just have to use those information here. We can use or be more customized with your specific herd depending on the name that you have related to the outbreak. In terms of diagnostic data, so like I said, we're going to use this to calculate the time to achieve the stability. Like Dr. Linhares said, can be processing fluids, can be tongue tip. So whenever you want to use here to share with us the data to track that metric, it's valuable. Can be a combination of them as well. For whole genome sequence, for example, most of the time serum is a good option at the beginning of the outbreak, right? In this slide, I just wanna share with you that we have more information. If you wanna go deeper about these projects, all those information that we mentioned here in this presentation, please go to our website. It's also to acknowledge here again, National Pork Board and also Iowa Pork Producer Association. So like Dr. Linhares said, these projects here were funded before by them. And now, from now to on, we have another important partnership here with BI. So from those herds that is going to enroll from now to on, we have up to $7 toward diagnostic support to provided by BI here. To like Dr. Linhares said, to help to track those those status of those herds. Now I'm turning back to Giovanni here.
At the end of the day, what we have been doing with the POMP project was this overall level of benchmark comparison for the characteristics that you have in your herd when you face the outbreak, what practices you have been implemented, doing those comparisons about the time to stability, time to baseline production, total losses. So now on that we are keeping moving and expanding this library of information database, we are continue to look for and try to identify the best practices that are associated with the success rate to eliminate PRRS virus. And that's why we are really inviting you all to apply for the POMP project and work with us and to keep this track of progress towards the PRRS virus elimination progress. We are looking for to keep expanding this, doing the analysis that we have been doing, but also as the producers are enrolling, we are increasing the number of herds within production system to also developing on-demand and customized analysis by a production system specific. So we really invite you to keep continue working with us on this project. And what we have the information, as Rodrigo said, that is straightforward to enroll. We just need after that to keep tracking the diagnostic and production data. So we have here a QR code that takes you for the POMP project to enroll your sites. And very happy to have you join us our webinar, and we will be able to take questions that you may have. And we see some here in the chat. As example, do you accept Canadian herds? Yes, of course we do.
No discrimination.
We see our friends from Mexico. We accept Mexican herds too.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Andres.
Hello. Good job, guys. So in the first cohort that you showed the time to stability, you saw shorter time, but then you show longer times. And one of the reasons that you were explaining, and if I remember right, in the first cohort, you used mostly serum samples at weaning. And then most of the most recent cohort is processing fluids. So is the definition still times to stability, the weaning piglet negative consistently? Because I don't believe the time to stability changed, it's just the detection rate has changed? Or what other comments regarding the testing and the sensitivity of the testing between serum samples and processing fluids? What do you think there?
Yeah, great comment, Andres. quickly share my thoughts here and then see if others. But you're right that I fully agree that processing fluid testing may or may not correlate with winning pig testing, right? Especially if they are just have a few negative results. However, when you have the more negative results you have, the more confident the more confidence you have that you are approaching stability. But anyways, that's why I said that this longer time to stability observed today may be a little bit due to the more sensitive. It's not only processing fluid, but it's the frequency too, right? We're hitting the herds on a weekly basis compared to 30 pigs before then. So I truly think that there will be a bias towards improved sensitivity today than we had 10 years ago. But also because of the longer time to achieve baseline productivity, I think there will be, there is also true, I think, this perception that that it's taking longer to eliminate the virus from the herd just based on those, because of those longer impact in productivity.
Okay, thanks. And I have another question is, what do you think about the use of sentinels? Like at a very low prevalence, how useful are the sentinels of picking up the virus if you introduce them to what's supposed to be a stable herd?
Andreas, my bias will be that sentinels, it's just not sensitive. And the reason is because at that point in time, it's right. So if you're using sentinels in a different scenario, maybe a different thing, but in that scenario where you have a very high herd immunity, PRRS is still very infectious, but it's not very contagious. Transmission is really slow, right? As evidenced by, we've seen several times cases of one single pig positive in a crate or a few piglets positive in the crate, and it's the only crate in the whole room that's positive. So at that point in time, transmission is really slow. So I would not rely on sentinels. I would much rather get those resources and increase my sample size for either processing fluids or tongue tips or familiar fluids, whatever you want, but active kind of sampling the pigs. That will be my guess.
Another resource that we use it on the whole genome sequence have been used outside for other projects was the monitoring of production parameters, and things like start to change the number of expected abortions in the farm, increase of pre-weaning mortality or stillborns. Those were indicative that something was going on in the herd. So if you have a herd that's stable, those are metrics that you can apply in your farm and keep looking for that, and those potentially can help you to early identify changes that may be lead for further investigation, early detect emergence of or activity of the PRRS virus in the herd.
There's a question here in the chat. What's the number of stillborn pigs you'd suggest in a single sample for tongue tips? Edison, if you could paste here the URL for Isadora's paper, that could be useful here to provide additional information. But long story short, here Isadora did a study where she collected tongue tips from stillbirth and then partnered that with a serum sampling from that same age group. And she did the same thing for tongue tips and processing fluids versus serum, tongue tips versus familiar fluid versus serum at the weaning. And then tongue tips, so here's the link for the paper in the chat if you want to see more details. And so the conclusion there from that study, at least in those farms that you worked with, was that tongue tips was really as sensitive or more sensitive than 45 pigs being blood samples from 45 pigs or from processing fluid from all pigs processed at that age group. So at this point, our recommendation is if you're going to do tongue tips, collect collect all the tips from all the stillbirds from that period of time. It's perfectly fine to freeze them, just the way you do with processing fluids. You collect them daily, you freeze, and you send as one aggregate sample per week, right, for one PCR a week. But the numbers are important, so the more stillbirds you could collect, the better. And it's really, it doesn't take time to collect, right? With the help with forceps and scissors, you could collect several tongue tips and throw them in a bag for sampling. There is somebody with the Tom. Did you raise your hand? Feel free to unmute yourself. And speak up.
Yep, I did ask. I have a question for you. So good stuff. I guess going back to the one of the first slides you put up talking about early detection, and aborts appear to be the most sensitive kind of first indicator of something's wrong. But I guess what we've seen sometimes is, I guess, to what degree, right? So like, is it a 50% increase? Is it any kind of increase, or do you have any pattern there, or is there not enough data for that?
For aborts, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good question. We actually use a statistical process control, Tom, because each herd may have a slightly different baseline, right, number of aborts per week. But in most cases, what we observe is about 0 to 1 to 2 aborts per week per 1,000 sows. And you deal a lot with those 7,000 sows, so just multiply that by 6 or 7, but expect up to 2 aborts per 1,000 sows per week. And then in a lot of cases, then when we see PRRS activity, it's gonna be 10 or above, right? 10, 20, or sometimes that number is skyrockets. So if you want to follow that, I would not advise to ask the farm managers to eyeball it. We have a program here in the website where we could, especially if the farm has the data on the cloud, we could help you implement some algorithms for ongoing automated monitoring of that program. It's another project here that Gustavo Silva heads in our team, based on, so you could track sows of feed, you could track aborts, you could track those neonatal losses, and asking the farm manager to eyeball that may be risky, but does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. I like the idea of having it on a statistical process control, so like a particular week may not scare you as much as a couple that are a little bit higher than normal.
Yeah, Edison pasted here a link for that ongoing automated monitoring of production data in breeding sows. There's the link there for you to gather more information. But again, just feel free to reach back to us. We're going to connect you with Gustavo and get that going. That's a pretty neat program.
This is the question, Doctor.
Another question here from Dr. Lefar, were the conclusions on the use of killed PRRS vaccine during the elimination on TTS? Good question. I knew I had the answer. The truth is we did not have enough sows using killed product. That's something that's, to be honest with you, in our wish list. It's something that we should look at, but we should design some field studies. If you have farms that where you want to enroll, let us know. That's something that we need to know more. It's what's the role of killed products on time to stability and baseline productivity. For questions, comments, things that we shared here that you think, I'm not sure about that. In my farms, I don't see that happening. So feel free to disagree or to share information that is conflicting with what we shared here. Feel free to speak up.
Yes, I have a comment. Thank you for the presentation, guys. It was really good. I'm really interested in the relationship between the herd size and the time to stability, because that will let us to lead better the efforts according to the kind of farms that we we attend or we help, right? I mean, it's not the same 10,000 sows herd 500. And we'll be really interested in see if there is any positive or negative relationship according to
Mhm.
herd size and time to elimination or stability, sorry.
Yeah, Alexander, that was a hypothesis we had here too. And so we had farms all the way from 500 sows to several thousand sows. We did not find a relationship.
Oh,
I would have expected differently. My hypothesis would
yes.
be the higher the herd, right, the longer it would take, but we did not find the relationship. But then as kind of, I would think that it's not only herd size, it's a little bit about the layout of the herd, right? How many air spaces, how many subpopulations you have in there. So that's something that we
Yeah.
should keep diving into and collect data on that as well.
Interesting. I will expect like as bigger the herd, as longer the time, right? But good information. Thank you.
Mm. Any additional comments, thoughts, reactions? Dr. Paul Yaskin, I'm going to pick on you. You're atypically quiet. I know you have something on your mind.
No, it's good review of the information. Yeah, just wondering if you've had a chance to break that down by different virus types and some of that sort of stuff.
What do you
Yes,
say, Giovanni?
we did. And let's just focus on the most recent outbreak that was the 2019, 2022 information. Of course, the new emerging PRRSV lineage 1C variant strain was the most aggressive, and we lose more than 8,000 piglets by that strain. And that was followed by other lineage 1H, 1A, 174. So there was difference by the virus that we have in the farms.
And difference too in what's the relatively new to the farm, right?
Correct.
If it's maybe a new virus to you, but not to Rodrigo. So this concept of different is.
It depends of the
changes.
farm. Yep.
I was a little surprised at the number of herds that you had with multiple viruses. That kind of surprised me.
2, 3, 4 or more viruses co-circulating that involving wild type viruses and expected and non-expected vaccine viruses.
Yeah, correct.
Right, Giovanni. So MLV attenuated vaccine viruses that you used, or that, what the heck is that doing here? And because you used a couple of years ago, or because your neighbor uses, so that there's some of that going on.
Our potential was brought into the farm during the outbreak time in combination with a wild type strain. So all of those combinations seems to be possible.
We're learning a lot with this the whole genome approach, answering a lot of those questions. Very good. Thank you for the time. We want to be respectful. It's 5 p.m. So we reached the hour here. As Edison said, this material is going to be recorded, and we are continuing to be available for those discussions. Should you want to enroll or further discuss the findings, reach us via email or scan the code or visit the webpage. Different ways to find us, track us down. We'll be here. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.